Okay, here we are on day 2 on the rebuild. I had to take the frame all apart in order to put the tail drive gear in. Quite a story involved with that. Went back out to the field to the crash site yesterday, and I was able to find that. And then when I went to the hobby store to get a replacement bearing that I had lost as well for that gear, they were all out. All local part stores were out. I called some local bearing companies. They didn't carry anything that small, so I went back out to the field again yesterday afternoon and combed the area, and lo and behold, I was able to find that little bearing out there in that field. So anyway, today we are continuing with the repair. I found that the easiest way to do it is to put the bearing into that bracket there first, and then we're going to put the bearing or the gear into that bearing, and there's also a little bushing that may need to go in the bottom of that. Hopefully that's getting in focus there. So we'll put that little bushing there on the bearing, on the shaft to the gear, and it's going to go on the lower side like so, on the larger gear, that is. And then we're going to drop that right into that bearing to hold that in place. Then take the other bearing, put on the top, and then, sorry, got to do this one-handed. That bearing, that top bearing, is going to set into place like so. Also, you're going to want to put that belt around that bearing first, because there's going to be no way of putting that belt on around the gear. I'm sorry. There's no way of putting that belt around that gear once you have everything in place. So I'm going to I have to get that belt out of there first. So we're going to go ahead and stop the filming and put that belt around that shaft, and be right back. Okay, I just wanted to take a minute to show you how I got that belt on there. I've already got the 2 screws securing this to the back side, and so now it's just a matter of reinstalling the half of the frame, and we'll be back where I started before realizing that I was missing the gear there. So okay, I'm almost done reassembling the frame here, but I just wanted to point out, don't forget the 2 spacers that's located here on the main shaft. I don't know if all Blade 450s have 2 spacers or not, so you may want to again double check when you go to take your main shaft out how many spacers that you have there, and just wanted to point that out. Okay, we got the frame back together, this time with the belt and the gear. So my next step is going to be to replace the tail shaft. So what I'll end up doing is taking all of the equipment off of this tail shaft and putting on the new one. At first I thought the tail was okay, but once I started taking things apart, I see that it was bent up here at the top. Since I got a new one already, we're going to swap everything out. I would also like to state that Blade does have a very nice video on how to replace the tail shaft. You may have seen it on your disc that came with the Blade 450. So I would recommend that you watch that if in order to replace your tail. If you don't have your disc, you can also find those videos on horizonhobby.com and or on the Blade website itself. And once I get the new tail on, I will continue recording. Okay, it's starting to look like a helicopter again. I got the tail back on there. I haven't tightened anything up just yet, because I'll have to make the adjustments once we're done and set the tail and rudder servo, and but I'm going to put in the rods, or the support rods, next. And luckily I didn't have hardly any damage to the support rods except for this one here. It needs to be, I'll just glue this one back in, and I still have a spare rod, but nothing wrong with this one. Again, I'll just glue it in and set those, and those will be done. Then I'll move on to the head, complete that head, and then we'll be all set to make final adjustments, and hopefully ready for a test flight. And one thing I would like to add also when putting that tail on is to make sure that your belt is tight. To do that, as you tighten these screws, all I did was I kept pulling back on the tail assembly, and then tighten a little bit more and pull on the tail assembly, pull it out in order to keep tension on that belt. And once I had these screws completely tight, gave it another good pull, and then just make sure that you've got some movement in the belt, but you don't want too much, and then that's a good way of making sure that that belt is tight. One of the things that I'm going to do next is I have to replace that control rod. It's slightly bent. It's also a good idea to check all your other control rods to make sure that none of them are bent. And if there's any that are questionable, I would recommend that you replace them. Probably going to be difficult to try to straighten them and reuse them after you've straightened them out. And the last thing you want is to have a bent control rod with regards to helicopter. You're just not going to get very good performance if you have a control rod that is bent, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that one. All of my other ones looked good. And off to the next step. Okay, I'm going to put in the Seesaw bar next into this head. I did find out that the bearings, you can buy the bearings separately for these. You don't have to buy the whole head assembly here. And they are the 3x6 by 2.5 bearings, BLH 1115. One thing I forgot to mention, that on the parts listing, the bearings for the tail gear are also listed as BLH 115, but they are definitely different sized bearings. At the hobby store yesterday, I discovered that the bearings that we need are 3x7x3 bearings, and the part number that they've got listed, let me get that here real quick. The part number that they have listed for the correct bearings are BLH 1613. When I get the opportunity here, I'm going to send Horizon Hobby an email, may even call them up and let them know that the parts number is incorrect for the bearing that goes to the tail gear shaft. And I forgot to mention that earlier when I had that apart. Again, those bearings that we need for the tail gear shaft is 3x7x3. And that part number again was BLH, get back to it, BLH 1613. And that's kind of an important thing. You get people ordering the wrong parts, and they're not going to be too happy. So anyhow, what I'm going to do now is we're going to put this Seesaw bar in there, put those bearings on it, and we'll continue from there.